We realized that Chris needed a screen, and that actually when you're looking at something with a screen, that this is a much better venue for that than the chapel, although Chris very much admired our chapel.
Beautiful.
So just a few words of introduction, and then I'll let Chris speak for himself. He did remind me that I need to be careful how I introduce him because he follows me. And since he was one of my first students, he might have some stories about me that I need to be careful about his sharing. So I need to be careful about what I'm sharing about him. But I've known Chris since 1987, which is
86, 87.
getting to be almost 30 years, which is a little scary.
Yes.
But I first met Chris when he was just a little bit older than most of you. He was my first floor proctor in a dorm at Deerfield Academy, where he was also a three-sport captain, soccer, skiing, and baseball. He went on from there to Middlebury, where very shortly after he entered as a freshman, he had a very serious skiing accident. And there's one story I will tell about Chris. I could list all of his accomplishments, but he'll tell you about that. Accomplishments which include being a world champion in both winter and summer sports, and having won 13 Olympic medals. So for those of you who want to ask him about that after, please feel free. But my favorite story about Chris is that when I first went to see him in the hospital after his accident, he was still pretty groggy, and he said, Miss Barton, I'm going to be skiing again within a year. And I remember thinking, I'm so glad that morphine is good stuff and that he has such a positive attitude. And I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to blow that bubble right now. The positivity really matters. But I hadn't reckoned on Chris's strength of spirit. And sure enough, within a year, he was skiing again, perhaps in a modified form, but just as fast as ever. And that's part of the story that he's going to tell you today. So please give a big welcome to Chris Waddell.
Thank you so much. How are you all doing on a nice rainy Thursday? Yeah. I lose track of the days. Everybody okay? You guys wide awake? You're not falling asleep after lunch, Henri? Are you? Okay, because I'm going to need some of your help as we go along. You okay with that? Yeah. You sure? Even if I told you that I went to Eagle Brook too? I felt like I had to get that out there at the beginning, just to, hopefully I can bring you back, as it's always good to turn your audience off the first thing you do. Anyway, my program is called Name Tags, and we've all worn a name tag like this, haven't we? Hello, my name is, but we wear a bunch of other name tags too. I share having gone to an all-boys school with you, right? And that's a bit of a name tag. You go home, and people are like, really? Interesting. And having had to wear coat and tie and those kinds of things. We wear a bunch of other name tags, don't we? I mean, based on how we look, how we talk, where we're from. My wheelchair in a lot of ways is a name tag, isn't it? It comes with some expectations and potentially some limitations. And we all have these limitations, don't we? I can't do this because ... And I want to see if we can get beyond those, and that's where I'm going to need your help. So our motto is, it's not what happens to you, it's what you do with what happens to you. So when I count to 3, I want those of you on the outside to say it's not what happens to you. And then those of you in the middle are going to answer with, it's what you do with what happens to you. Pretty simple, right? No big deal? Okay, you ready? 1, 2, 3.
It's not what happens to you. It's what you do with what happens to you.
Exactly. Not what happens to you is what you do with what happens to you. And I am going to give you complete license, permission to interpret this however you choose. We're going to do this a few more times as we go along, because it's really easy to parrot these words right now, isn't it? They're on the screen. It's not what happens to you. It's what you do with what happens to you. You're like, hey, I know all those words. But then something goes wrong. You're like, I can't believe what happened. So I give you permission. See if you can do this. You don't have to do it in unison. You can do it in a funny voice. I don't care how you do it, but make it your own. We did this with some adults one time and told them, don't do it in unison. And I thought their heads were going to explode. They're like, okay, like you go off and we'll all do it in unison. So I'm sure I have much higher hopes for you guys as we move along. Question, I need 3 people to answer the question. Raise your hands, answer this question. And the question is, what do these people on this screen, what do they have in common? All right, right here. They've been challenged?
No, talent.
Talent. Okay, talent, yes. Most definitely they're talented, they're successful. How about right here?
I've been changing the way that people live today.
Change the way that people live today. Yeah, exactly. Most definitely, yeah. So talented, they changed the way. Okay, over here. They're famous. Okay, exactly. Famous, talented, and they changed the way that we look at the world, which is totally true. I mean, a lot of these people are people we read about in history, right? That little light bulb thing, that's kind of a big deal, isn't it? We had like 1,200 patents, really created the foundation on which our modern society is built. What if I told you that all these people, all these famous, successful people who changed our world also had a learning disability? It's pretty amazing, isn't it, when you look at it? You think that some things that are easy for all of us weren't necessarily easy for them? And the thing I want you to take out of this is that sometimes that's a good thing. That difficulty forces us to look at things differently, to make it our own, to create our own strategies. And those strategies really ultimately are how they saw the world differently and brought that to us. Einstein was relatively smart, right? And he said, everyone is a genius. But if we judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live the rest of its life believing it's stupid. That is funny, isn't it? Because fish don't climb trees. But what he's saying is if we judge everybody by the same criteria, it's really easy to feel stupid. Because there are those people who are really good in math. There's people who can build their own computer. And there's people who, we're playing games out there, and there's some sort of a conflict of the people who can help people get together, get over that conflict. There are a lot of different kinds of genius, aren't there? But if we all judge it in one way, it's really easy for all of us to feel stupid. To feel like we're on the outside looking in. Now, talking about fish, and I've got to give this one a little preamble as well. I mean, obviously, Michael's in a position right now where he's going through some difficulty, which in some ways is representative. You know what? No matter how successful you are, no matter how strong you are, no matter how educated you are, no matter how rich you are, there are going to be things that force you to look at your life, to look at the decisions, the questions, the choices that you've made in a really critical kind of way. And that's obviously where he is right now. He's in that position where he's going to prove, hopefully, that it's not what happens to you, it's what you do with what happens to you. That's not why I put him in this screen, or on this in this program. But the reason I put him on this program is, it's kind of funny that he's in a picture where he's not in the pool, though, isn't it? Because he sort of looks like he should be in the pool, doesn't he? And he kind of has like this merman kind of look, right? I mean, like his long arms and legs, big hands and feet. When he was a kid, he got picked on, he got bullied for the way he looks. And you can see it, right? You can see it, these big hands and feet. It's like a German Shepherd puppy who hasn't grown into his paws yet, right? But those very attributes, you've used flippers. Those very attributes, along with a whole lot of hard work on his part, were what made him the winningest Olympian ever. Now, do you think the people who picked on Michael Phelps when he was a kid, do you think they want to hang out with him now? Totally, right? Like, dude, you're on TV, you won all those medals, you're famous, you're cool. Do you think he takes any of their phone calls? No. Not at all. He was signing autographs after some big race, and one of the guys who'd made his life just miserable in school came up to him and said, "Hey, Michael, we used to hang out in school." And he knew exactly who this guy was, but he turned to him and went, "I have no idea who you are." Totally blew him off. And the thing is, do you think there's somebody like that in our midst? Somebody that we don't really notice, somebody that we overlook, somebody that we pick on that later on in life is going to be a Michael Phelps or going to be a Steve Jobs or somebody that we're like, "Hey, wow, like, you're cool." Because we don't know what we're going to do. And the reason we don't know what we're going to do is because when things go wrong, we've got to try to find a way to make something out of that. So are you ready? 1, 2, 3.
It's not what happens to you. It's what you do with what happens to you.
All right, that was good in total unison. We're not in the chapel, you know. You don't have to do it in unison. But anyway, all good. Part of the reason that I'm here today, and Ms. Young now, yes, exactly. I've got things changed, see? Alluded to this, I had, almost 26 years ago, I had a skiing accident. I was a ski racer in college. My first day of Christmas vacation. I went home, my brother and I went to our home mountain, met up with a few buddies, took a couple of runs before we were going to train that day, and in the middle of a turn, my ski popped off. Fell in the middle of the trail, didn't hit anything but the ground, broke 2 vertebrae, damaged the spinal cord. So my life changed potentially really significantly in that moment. And we're talking about the name tags, the labels that we wear. Before my accident, it was really about who I was. Like you, I was a student. But some of what I thought made me different was that I was a ski racer. In some ways I kind of thought it made me cool. And the implication was that I was able, that I could do whatever I wanted to do. But then I had my accident, and it wasn't as much about me as it was about what had happened to me. So some things don't change. I continued as a student. But when a lot of people saw me, and you might have had the same experience when you came in today, they saw that I was in a wheelchair. They saw I was a paraplegic. They saw that I couldn't walk. They saw what I couldn't do as opposed to what I could do, which then means that especially in their eyes, and in my eyes as well, that I'm disabled, which means that it's really easy to feel like I'm on the outside. And we all kind of feel like we can be on the outside, don't we? And we all have that one thing that if anybody knew that one thing, if it got exposed, we'd be on the outside looking in. So we hide it really well. And ours is far more significant than anybody else's because it's ours. Everybody else's problems, they're so much easier to deal with. And we think in some ways it makes us unique, but it really doesn't. It makes us human. And I want to illustrate this point just quickly. Can I get everybody with a yellow card to stand up, please? Okay, all right, you can sit back down. How about everybody with a blue, or with a green card? Can I get you to stand up? All right, you can sit back down. How about everybody with stars drawn on their card? Can I get you to stand up? Just you. Wow. And what's your name?
My name is Wim.
Wim.
Right.
All right. Wim, so usually this goes to a student, but I'm assuming you're not a student.
Always a student.
That's the whole name tag with the gray hair thing. I mean, yeah.
You got it. That's my secret. You got it.
Older 9th grader, really, yeah, exactly. Well, you can come up later on, and I will give you a copy of the DVD of our Kilimanjaro climb. Thank you for being that one person.
Well, you're very welcome.
Appreciate it. Thank you. I have never had that. That's amazing. So we get a teacher, you get an older 9th grader, which I thought the 9th graders were all gone. But anyway.
Would you like me to?
No. This is perfect. This is good. I like it. Because some of what we had to look at is what we saw when that happened, right? Because you guys don't know what I'm going to make you do you? You have no, and I might make you look stupid, right? There is that, and there still is that potential. Don't lose sight of that. That still is the possibility here. But the thing is, when you're standing up, you're a little bit nervous, right? And you're looking around, you have no idea what this challenge is, you have no idea what's going on, you feel a little bit isolated. I always loved the front row. When we got to the green group, this guy, I had him stand up and he looked at it and he's like, yep, green. Looked over, nobody else is standing up, this is not cool. And you have to look around, right? You start looking around, you're like, okay, if this guy's gonna make me look stupid, I want to have a friend. Right? Because I don't want to look stupid alone, right? Nobody wants to look stupid alone. We look stupid together, that's fine. It's all good. And then we had poor Wim here, who seems to be relatively okay with this, who's just the one person who has to stand up. And the thing is, the greatest risk you take is taking no risk at all. If you spend all of your time going through school ensuring that you always have friends with you on that challenge, you might miss this genius that Einstein was talking about. You might miss the thing that's unique to you. You might miss the thing that you have to contribute to the world. And that'd be a huge shame, right? But this idea of being isolated is really scary. And when I was in the hospital, I felt like what had happened to me was going to make me totally separate. I'm lying there in my hospital bed thinking that I'm going to be alone for the rest of my life as a result of what had happened to me. These are the thoughts that you have. And I don't want to be in the hospital because the hospital's for sick people, but I have to be in the hospital. I went from 175 pounds down to 125 pounds. I was 20 years old. I was like a baby. I couldn't get out of bed by myself. I couldn't dress myself. They taught me how to dress myself lying in bed, which is kind of hard when you're lying in bed anyway, but it's a lot harder when your legs are like wet noodles and you can't sit up. Trying to put my pants on was this combination like soccer throw-in, rodeo lasso, hope that I caught my feet in each pant leg. Like as I'm throwing my pants over my head, trying to catch my feet. And then I'm super, super weak at this point. Pull them up halfway and then I roll over and pull up one side and roll up over, pull up the other side. My fly ends up on my left hip. I'm like, really? This is so uncool. Like I'm sitting down and I look ridiculous. But it was the most powerful I've ever been in my life. Does that sound strange? Like this tragedy, I couldn't walk, but it was the most powerful I've ever been. And I was powerful because I let go of a lot of the things that trip us up every day. Like the frustration, I'm just not going to do it anymore. Or the worry, like there's no way I'm ever going to finish all the homework that these teachers give us. Assuming you guys might get that, yeah. And then like a half an hour later, you say the same thing and you haven't done anything about your homework. Totally been there. Or the insecurity of like, you know what, I'd love to do that, but that's for somebody smarter. That's for somebody cooler. There's always some reason, right? And I had to let go of these things because I needed something, I needed to heal. And I needed all of my power to heal, and these things would trip me up. And so it's the most powerful I've ever been because I started little and I started small. Just this little thing, I'm just about ready to leave the hospital, and the head doctor called me into his office. And he said, "You're not ready to leave." And it's totally unfair. Like he's sitting there behind the big mahogany desk. He's got the shirt and the tie and the smock on. He looks doctorly, he looks officially, he looks smart. I've got my pants all askew, but I say, okay, why am I not ready to leave? And he said, because you haven't been depressed. And I was like, I kind of thought I was doing well, not being depressed. But if you tell me I have to do that, I'm willing, like I'll go back to my room and be depressed and not like for half an hour, what do I have to do? Like I want to get out of here. But he was looking at what I'd lost. That eventually this depression would be bigger and bigger. But we've been taught that we can do whatever we want to do, right? If we're willing to work hard enough, if we're creative enough, we can do whatever we want to do. I didn't want somebody at 20 years old to tell me that I couldn't do whatever I wanted to do. So I said, you know what, fine, I promise you, I will have bad days later, but right now I don't really have time for it. Right now I've got to prove to myself that I can still do whatever I want to do. Now, you say, okay, fine, that was almost 26 years ago, right? Long time ago. Lots happened between then and now. A couple of years ago I was in Tibet, long way from home. Took 16 hours driving over these bumpy dirt roads just to get into China, then flew halfway across the world. When I got home, I wanted to see what I missed. So I went to my mailbox, and my mailbox isn't in front of my house, it's at the end of my street, one of those collective mailboxes. So I parked my car, started pulling my chair out, putting the wheels on, and this little girl rode up. She's like 6 years old, on her little pink bike, pink streamers coming off the handlebars, and she said, "What happened to your legs?" Now, I've just flown halfway across the world. I don't really feel like having a conversation with a 6-year-old. Nothing against 6-year-olds, but I'm tired. But the thing is, from the time we're little, we're taught not to stare at somebody who looks different, aren't we? It's impolite to stare, and the problem is we never get a chance to stare. We never get a chance to ask questions. We never get a chance to know somebody who seemingly is different from us, but probably shares a whole lot more in common, and definitely shares something that they can teach us. There are 1.1 billion people in the world with physical disabilities. Like 1 in 6, 1 in 7 people. I felt like I had to tell the little girl my story as best I could because of those 1.1 billion people. And so I told her what I told you, that I had a skiing accident, and I tried to describe what happened to me in ways that she could understand it. I said, you know those little bumps on your back? Well, those are bones, and those bones protect the nerves, and the nerves take the message from the brain to the rest of the body. And because I broke 2 of those bones, it's like cutting a power cord. So now the message doesn't go from my brain to my legs or my legs back. I don't know how well I'm doing. Apparently I did pretty well. She said, so you'll never walk again? And I said, no, probably not. And she rode away, and as she rode away, she said, well, that's too bad. And I wish that I had stopped her, because if I'd never had my accident, I never would have been the best in the world at anything. I was the best monoskier in the world. That's an amazing gift, isn't it, to be the best in the world at something? I wouldn't have met presidents and heads of state, the Dalai Lama. She just saw the tragedy. She didn't see the potential gift. that's what that little girl meant, right? It's too bad you ski, climb mountains and all that stuff, right? No. It's the thing is, and that's what it is. You guys ready? Because this is your part again. You ready? 1, 2, 3.
It's not what happens to you. It's how you do with what happens to you.
Exactly. It's not what happens to you, it's what you do with what happens to you. And so we're looking at the name tags that we wear. We saw before my accident, we saw after my accident. Then after competing, they changed again, and some things don't change though. I continue to be a paraplegic. That doesn't change, but I also became a world champion. And this is kind of the interesting one in that I was in the hospital for 2 months. I went back to school, and so many of my friends at school said, I could never do what you've done. And sometimes we create these name tags for ourselves to keep ourselves safe, don't we? In the eyes of a lot of my friends, I became this superhero. I thought that nobody would want to be around me as a result of what had happened to me, but suddenly I got elevated to this superhero kind of status, which in some ways kept me safe because it was so different than what I thought people were going to see in me when I was lying in that hospital bed. But this was the hardest name tag that I've ever worn, this idea of being a superhero, because in a lot of ways it's like acting, that people expected it from me, that I could never really have a bad day, because superheroes don't have bad days. And the problem was that I didn't know where that image stopped and where I started. When I retired from competitive sport, it was more difficult for me to retire from competitive sport than it was to break my back. My identity was more tied to being a superhero because it kept me safe than it was to walking. And when I was in the hospital, I had to go through, I had to see a psychiatrist and all this stuff. It was part of the whole program, and I kind of come in and go, hey, yeah, I'm willing to talk to you for an hour, but I'm pretty good, I need to get on some other stuff. After I retired, I actually sought somebody out because I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what my identity was, and I thought, how can I allow myself to be honest? How can I allow myself to be vulnerable? And what I came up with was I had to have a goal that was bigger than me myself. So Viktor Frankl, who is a Holocaust survivor, who's also a psychologist, said that success like happiness can't be pursued. It has to ensue as the unintended byproduct of one's personal dedication to a cause greater than oneself. And the cause greater than oneself for me was the 1.1 billion people like me. And it's what prompted me to try to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, tallest mountain in Africa, 19,340 feet, the highest, what they call the roof of Africa. And I thought if I could get to the highest point in Africa, that people would have to see beyond the wheelchair, to see me, and to see the 1.1 billion people like me. And if I was going to do that, if I was going to draw the attention that I needed to draw, I had to do it under my own power. It wouldn't be nearly as impressive if somebody carried me to the top. View might be nice, but it wouldn't be as impressive. It wouldn't be like breaking a record. The problem was, I reached this point on the crater rim, about 18,500 feet, and I couldn't get over these boulders. So my crew and the porters, they carried me. Carried me for like 100 feet. 100 feet of the 13,000 feet that we climbed, from the 6,000 foot base to the 19,000 foot summit. But that 100 feet to me, it meant that I failed. It meant that I failed my team, who sacrificed for 2 years just to give me the opportunity to try to climb the mountain. It meant that I failed those 1.1 billion people whose lives I was trying to affect. So it's a dormant volcano, and went from the crater rim down into the crater. And as we go into the crater, I'm crushed. I am crushed because I feel like I've failed. I'm also livid. I am so mad at this point, and I'm pedaling along, and I just want a quiet moment, and I'm thinking, I've got to talk to Dave, I've got to talk to Dave. Now, Dave was my guy. Dave was the guy who developed this vehicle. It sort of looks like a Mars rover married to arm pedal power. He also ran up and down this 19,000 foot mountain 4 or 5 times to scout out the best route, to find the best route for me. And I finally got a quiet moment, and I took Dave aside, and I said, Dave, you disappointed me. You let me lie to all these people. You let me tell them I could do this unassisted. And you knew these boulders were here. You knew I couldn't do it. And Dave guides throughout the world. And he said, nobody climbs a mountain alone. Everybody does it as part of a team. This is that epiphany for me, that light bulb moment where I go, oh, so you mean I started with this goal to affect the lives of 1.1 billion people, but it's my journey too? And this is the lesson that I'm supposed to learn, that I want to minimize this feeling of being separate, but yet if I climb the mountain all by myself, then I don't need anybody. And if I don't need anybody, then I'm separate, then I'm alone. So make peace with it, realizing this is the lesson that I'm supposed to learn. It's the reason why you do something that's this hard. And as we reach the top the next day, I've made peace with it personally, but professionally, this was supposed to be our sexy hook. This was supposed to be the way that we'd attract attention and sponsors and donors and get ourselves out of debt, me personally at that point. And I didn't know how the media was going to perceive it. But then I look at the guy next to me, and Tajiri had been a porter on the mountain. He was up early one morning carrying the gear, well before I ever met him, and there's a rock slide. Rock slide that killed 3 people who were still asleep in their tents. It literally ripped Tajiri's leg off of his body. And we're talking about the name tags, the labels, the limitations that we can wear in developing countries. They often believe that a physical disability means that God is punishing you and your family. You've done something worthy of punishment. When we first met Tajiri, my producer on the film said, we should have him climb with us. It'd be so great to have an African, a former porter, reconnecting with the mountain. It'd be a parallel to your story for the movie. It'd make it a better film. And I said, I don't think he can do it. This name tag of God punishing him and his family seemed like he'd given up. We bought him a new prosthesis when it was lighter, when it fit him better. He went out and he trained. First day back on the mountain, he said to the other porters, you never thought you'd see me here again. Well, I'm back. And he was. This guy had been a hollow shell. The guy was back. I'm worried about the media, but he became an example that God wasn't punishing him and his family. We've got to learn from those examples, because sometimes we need those examples to figure out our own lives. Now, this whole mindset of it's not what happens to you, it's what you do with what happens to you, I think is a great mindset. But Donna Valpetta, who created this program with me, thought we needed a little something more, so she came up with what she calls the 4 S's of resilience. And these are questions we can ask ourselves when things go wrong. And the first one's about self. Am I a victim or am I a survivor? And so for me, I could have continued to live that life that that doctor probably thought I was going to live, or I could have proven that I could do whatever I wanted to do. The difference between being a victim and a survivor. Now with the situation, is it overwhelming or is it a challenge? I'm guessing that a couple of you out there play video games, right? And part of the intrigue of video games is that they get harder, right? You finish one level, you go to a harder level. You finish another level, you go to a harder. Why can't we look at that in our everyday lives? If something goes wrong, it's like, oh, well, this is an opportunity, right? This is just another challenge to go slay my dragon, right? Now, you're lucky to be in a situation where you have a tremendous amount of support. Friends, family, teachers, administrators use that support because nobody climbs a mountain alone. And do we have one strategy or do we have a bunch of strategies? Remember we talked about Edison, that little light bulb thing? He didn't do that overnight, did he? He said, I have not failed. I just found 10,000 ways it won't work. It takes a lot of ways that won't work before you find the way that will work. Now this idea of the greatest risk you take is taking no risk at all. Wayne Gretzky, greatest hockey player ever, said you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. If you don't take a shot, you won't score. If you don't take a risk, you might not ever find that genius that Einstein was talking about. But sometimes we're so worried about failure that we're not willing to take that risk, right? Michael Jordan, he was relatively good at what he did, right? He said, I have missed over 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life, and that's why I succeed. So often we want to perceive failure as a brick wall. And you say, no, it's not a brick wall. It's a stepping stone. If you try and you fail and you learn, it's a stepping stone to greater and greater success. Now later on today, you have your cards. I want you to think about, what are your name tags? What do you want your name tags to be? Because that genius in you, it might not be visible to anybody else right now. It might be this tiny little thing. And the thing is, write down what you want your name tags to be, and then hold yourself accountable. Tape it to your locker. Tape it to the mirror where you go into brush your teeth in the morning and you go, that's the person I want to be today. And then at night you go back and go, was I the person that I wanted to be today? And the spirit of sharing, the name tags that I'm trying to hold myself to are that I want to be a risk taker or a lifelong learner. Learning doesn't end when you stop school. If it does, pretty much everything ends. You know, learning's pretty much the way to be alive. The opposite, not so good. Being a risk taker doesn't necessarily mean doing something crazy. It means being willing to risk embarrassment. So I speak a lot. I speak 100, 200 times a year. But I thought if I could be funny, that I'd be better. So I signed myself up to go to open mic night at a comedy club. They made me pay $5 to try to be funny for 3 minutes. I prepared all of my stuff. I got up there and there's this bright light shining in my eyes, and I totally forgot everything that I was supposed to say. And the little voice in my head is saying, you realize they're out there, right? I'm like, yes, I realize they're out there. Well, you realize that they expect you to say something. I'm like, yes, I realize that, but I have no idea. I mean, sometimes we've got to be willing to bring ourselves out of our comfort zone to risk this sense of embarrassment to be able to learn and grow, right? Because we might actually find something that we're really good at. And it might just be a step to something better. Now, Donna, who works with me, said the only way I've been able to do this is by being a quality person. I remind myself of that every day. I want to treat people the way that they want to be treated. And the last one is kind of interesting in that I'm finally doing something about this, but I think my whole life I've wanted to tell stories, I've wanted to write, but I also remember a lot of those English papers that came back just dripping with bloody red ink, right? Yes, exactly. Yes. One of the abusers here. Anyway, but you know, it's so easy sometimes not to do something about it. You know, to think about it, to say, okay, in my head, I am this. But to prove it is a whole lot more challenging. But we've got to try to prove it or else it's not real. Right? So actually I'm lucky this year. I just met with my publisher. I have my first children's book that's coming out, and I'm actually doing another one on a graduation speech that I did at Middlebury, which is called Things I Want to Remember, Not to Forget. So actually I finally have 2 books that are coming out in the not too distant future. So anyway, part of how we get there though, things are going to go wrong, aren't they? And on this one I want you to emphasize a couple of words. So you guys are going to emphasize it's not what happens to you, and then you're going to emphasize it's what you do with what happens to you. Okay, you ready? 1, 2, 3.
It's not what happens to you. It's what you do with what happens to you.
Exactly. It's not what happens to you, it's what you do with what happens to you. Now, one final point for you guys. You spend a lot of time here, don't you? More time than you spend anywhere else. Really, anywhere, right? This is your community. And as long as you can remember, people have told you what to do, haven't they? Like your parents, your teachers, coaches, everybody's always telling you what to do, aren't they? You are way more powerful than you think you are, though. That's the thing. I mean, like, this is your community. You are responsible for creating this community. The thing is, if you're going to take a risk, high likelihood you're going to fall flat on your face the first time, right? And if everybody laughs at you, you're not going to really take a risk again, are you? It's not going to happen. But have you ever noticed this? Have you ever noticed when somebody is super, super nice and super generous to you for no apparent reason? Somebody's super nice to you, super generous to you, and what do you think at that point? You're like, I feel a little bit uncomfortable that you're being so nice to me, and I feel like I want to be really nice to you. Like, oh, no, you take the big piece. I don't want to. No, you take the big piece. And the thing is, the question to you guys is who's going to start that? Who's going to start that? Because it's a cycle. If somebody can go out and start that cycle and then you pass it along, yeah, it's not what happens to you, it's what you do with what happens to you, but it's also how you are responsible for building a community that's going to allow you to take a risk. And that's something that you're going to take with you for the rest of your lives. In realizing that you're responsible for the community around you. And you're not just a tiny little part where people tell you what to do. So that's the end of my program, but I think we have time for some questions. Do we have time for some questions? Are there any questions? Because if there aren't, then you have to go back to class, so it's your choice. Any questions? Okay.
Look, before I ask my question, I just want to thank you for your incredible story and message. I don't know what you would place as maybe being of most importance in terms of your outlook on life. I mean, maybe there are a bunch of things, but your attitude and your remaining optimistic and positive and overcoming obstacles. How did that develop? I'm assuming over time. Can you talk a little bit about that?
How did that develop? Yeah, I mean, the nature of resilience, I think, is a funny and interesting thing, right? To maintain an optimistic viewpoint as things are going badly. And obviously, that's not something that happens every moment of every day. You know, things go badly, and that's it, I'm done, I'm not doing this anymore, and then you come back and go, maybe. And I think that generally, there are a few things that are part of that. One, we're not all motivated all the time. So surrounding ourselves with motivated people who hold us to the person that we want to be. It's a really, I mean, we're far better at lying to ourselves and cheating ourselves than we are other people, right? And so if we make a commitment to somebody else and say, yes, this is what I want to do, I'm committed to you, you're less likely to stop that. And I think that some of it is just knowing my own downfalls and my own shortcomings. And some of the resilience is really ultimately from experiences, from failing. My mother's often been in the audience when I've done these things, and this kills her, but I say the greatest gift that she and my father gave to my brother and me was the opportunity to fail. And that was something that they even did after my accident. I can only imagine what was going through their minds, where I said, okay, I want to go back to an almost 200-year-old school on a hill, built out of granite in the middle of February. You know, really? That sounds like a great idea, but they did it. And I think that that's a part of it, is this opportunity, and then saying, okay, we're going to fix it for you, what are you going to do? So I think a lot of it comes from my family, it comes from those experiences, but it also comes from looking around, and motivation is everywhere. And if we find somebody who's passionate about something, you hear a great line of a song or read something great in a book or whatever, I mean, there's something every moment. Somebody who's just happy, and it's raining out and miserable, and somebody's like, yeah, this is great. My assistant often says that, Rachel, how are you doing? She's like, best day ever. Like, really? Every day. You know, it's like, you want to surround yourself with people like that. And I think ultimately, that's where it comes from, and knowing that ultimately we are human and we are fallible, and we've got to do whatever we can to minimize those aspects of our life. All right. Is there another one? Oh, there we go. How can you overcome something bad that's happened to you? I think that part of it is sort of, because sometimes, like when I first had my accident, I knew one guy who was in a wheelchair, but I didn't know him very well. And so immediately the image for me is like, life is over, effectively. Which is oftentimes when something bad happens to us, that's our response because we don't know anything. So I think the first part of it is education. Is trying to figure out what does this mean? What does this bad situation, whatever, quote unquote bad situation we have, what does it mean? And then how can I create a plan? It's, when you think about it, like bad things happen all the time. And isn't it kind of interesting where we look at we went through this, did they call it a depression, the 2008 kind of thing, where the economy went really bad and everybody's going, well, that's it, there's nothing we can do. And then as we're coming out of it, we realize there are people who did really well in that period of time. Like those people on that third slide, no matter who we are, things are hard, but some people are going to find a way to be successful in that. And if somebody's going to find a way to be successful, the question is, why not us, right? And so that's your creativity. That's the part of looking at a problem from a variety of different viewpoints and trying to figure out how can I solve this problem? And do I have to bring somebody else in to help me solve this problem? So does that help? Okay, perfect. How about all in the back?
Yeah, you raised a question. I'm curious as to what's your favorite
hill or race venue, or the one that maybe scares you the most, whether it's Canaan or Kitzbühel or something like that, as you've raced at those places?
I have not raced at Canaan or Kitzbühel, but Kitzbühel I think scares me just watching on television.
Yeah, yeah. I'm wondering if you have a favorite place you went in your time in racing.
Favorite place? Well, I mean, I won all 4 races in Lillehammer, so that holds a place that's fairly dear in my heart for some reason, which was funny because we went all the way to Norway, and it felt a lot like being in Vermont or New Hampshire, going up the lift and you're going, I recognize that smell, and there's a working farm on the mountain. So you're like, cow manure, yes, this is the romantic glamorous part of the whole thing. Favorite places for me, I live now in Park City, Utah, so you are a product of your choices, I guess, and I guess I've made a good choice in that respect. And so I ski mostly at Deer Valley now, but one of my favorite places that I competed was up in Whistler. Whistler was just great, but downhill in general scared me to death. That picture in the video where I'm in the air is in a downhill, and that's from Snow Basin from the games in Salt Lake City in 2002. And on that jump, I think I probably flew for like 80 to 100 feet or something like that off of that jump.
Top speed, you've been Clark on the speed course?
Top speed's been about 70 miles an hour, which is, you realize how fast you're going when you try to stop or when something goes wrong. But downhill scared me to death. It always felt like I had somebody's hand in my back as I'm like, okay, you got to go. I'm like, you can't make me go. But I also was most successful in downhill. And to me, fear has been one of my greatest motivators in that it's, is it real? Is it not real? And on one of my mirrors at home, in front of where I trained, I raced wheelchairs in the summer. So in the wintertime, I would train indoors, and I have a mirror indoors so that I can sort of coach myself and look at my form and everything. And on that mirror it says, run toward your fear. And the fear oftentimes is the fear of embarrassment, the fear of physical pain, and oftentimes like this fear of physical pain, it's like, it's a lot less when you say, I'm going directly toward this and I'm going to make it hurt as much as I can. And then you think, well, it doesn't hurt nearly as much as I thought it would. As opposed to, I hope this really doesn't hurt that much. Which when you're doing intervals, it definitely does hurt. So yeah, I think that all the venues. I mean, I love competing in Europe, just because culturally it was just amazing. But each in such an ingrained part of their whole culture. So yeah, I would say. But it's always great to come back here too.
What other Paralympic sports do you partake in besides skiing?
What other Paralympic sports? So I raced. So I ski raced, and then I raced wheelchairs on the track. And racing wheelchairs is basically like running. It's our equivalent of running. And I did 100, 200, 400, and 800 on the track. So really, which was kind of a change when I went to climb Kilimanjaro, because I didn't do a meaningful international competition that lasted longer than 2 minutes. And I went from 2 minutes to an average of 9 hours a day. So, was there one back here?
What was the hardest thing to overcome after the accident?
What was the hardest thing to overcome after the accident? I think that it's really easy to say other people's perceptions, but I think I'm going to take it a step further. This is sort of like the picture in the picture kind of thing, where it was my impression of other people's impressions, and sort of assuming that to be true on some level. And I think that was the hardest part. That's this level of honesty, I think, really is trying to figure out what I'm taking out of that, and how I see myself, and how I see other people who are like me, and what my bias is and my prejudice, because I think we all have some, right? I mean, that's the hard part is sort of acknowledging it in some ways. Okay, well, that's something I can work on.
What was it like to reach the summit of Kilimanjaro?
What was it like to reach the summit of Kilimanjaro? It was euphoric for me. It was euphoric in that it had taken 2 years to try to get there. And 2 years, I thought of quitting a lot of times as we were trying to get to the mountain, but I never thought of quitting on the mountain. So it was euphoric. It was humbling, though. It was so humbling. You think that when you climb a mountain like that and you do something that's sort of this big a challenge, that you're ready, you have a flag ready just to stake in the heart of this thing and say, I conquered you. And it wasn't like that at all for me. It really was that it was a communion with the mountain in some ways. It was this opportunity to sort of exist and learn, because that's ultimately why you do something that's that difficult, because you sort of experience things on a spiritual level. And it was saying thank you to the mountain, really getting up there, like thank you for letting me experience this and for getting there. And yeah, it really was.
You've done so much and inspired so many. What are you most proud of?
What am I most proud of? I think really of climbing the mountain. Because the mountain was really about more than me. When I was competing, it was about more than me as well. In that I felt like if I went 70 miles an hour on one ski, that picture didn't fit with the picture of somebody in a wheelchair. And I liked that because it spoke for me, but then it also, in some ways, spread a little bit of doubt for the rest of the 1.1 billion people, that hopefully would force you to doubt a little bit of what you thought you believed or thought you knew. But the mountain really is probably the thing that I'm most proud of. But in talking about like the name tag of the writer part, I've been working on my memoir for about 12 years, which is more challenging than the mountain ever was. To try to reach an honest level and have the tools to be able to communicate on an honest level, to make it universal, I think is a huge challenge. And so that's the next project that really is far bigger than a 19,000-foot mountain.
So you climbed Golden Dove, you're a gold medalist, you're running through your life, and I'm just curious, beyond obviously speaking, inspiring us, what are some goals you have for the future?
What are some goals that I have for the future? It's funny, I seem to be getting asked that question all week. I have no idea. It's just one of those weeks. It's funny. And it's totally, I met with my high school roommate in New York earlier this week, and he said, okay, well, let's put a plan together for you between now and 2050. And I was like, where did this come from? I have no idea. Why are you holding me to this? But really, I think that it's been eye-opening. And I think that the eye-opening thing that came out of that conversation, because I'm still formulating this stuff. My wife and I have started working with a life coach to figure out some of this stuff, because she and I live this ridiculously peripatetic life where, her office is in London, we live in Park City, we kind of meet up with each other, throughout the world kind of thing. But what I took out of that conversation is, you do need to have a plan. Like you can get a lot done in 35 years. Which assumes that I'll get to 90, I guess, but at the same time, you can get a lot done in 35 years. And then I had another lunch yesterday, and the guy with whom I had lunch, I said, okay, so where are you going from here? And he'd actually just come from a kung fu lesson. We had lunch, and then he was going to a dance lesson, a waltz lesson. And he was saying that as a kid, he'd never sort of had this sense of kinesthetic awareness. And he wanted to teach himself. And he was somebody who, learning from him, he was saying, how can I go to the basics of what I want to learn? Because sometimes it's really easy to feel like we want to learn, start right in the middle. And I think that it's a real process for me, that I'm kind of getting to that point of saying, what do I want to do? What are the basics? Because it's really easy to think, I want to do everything. And it's really easy to be ineffective at doing everything. I often say that I have a Jeopardy knowledge of the world, that I know one answer about just about everything. But it's not that deep, but hopefully to deepen things. So. Did my accident affect my relationship with my friends and family? In some ways, what it did, not the way that I assumed that it would as I was lying in the hospital. I think what it did is it made who I was obvious to my friends and family. I don't feel like it changed who I was, but it made it obvious to them. And I think it made it obvious to me, because sometimes we learn from ourselves as well, right? That we go, oh, well, I did that. And if I did that, what else can I do? And so yeah, I think it just sort of deepened their knowledge of who I was.
What are
is your favorite mountain to ski nowadays?
What is my favorite mountain to ski nowadays? I said I live in Park City, and I ski mostly at Deer Valley, which is really probably my favorite place to ski right now, because it's, because it's a great place, but it's also 10 minutes from my house, which makes it a whole lot easier. So, do you have a favorite? Is that what you're saying?
Oh no, I was going to add another question.
Okay. Is it a hard one though?
No.
Okay.
What was the scariest mountain you've ever skied before the accident?
Scariest mountain I ever skied before my accident. Wow. Huh. That is interesting. I think it was a lot of it was condition based, and so I grew up skiing in a place called Berkshire East in Massachusetts, and there were times that Berkshire East was most assuredly the scariest place I've ever been. Because there were times that it had rained and it had frozen and it was just as slick, and you think, wow, those trees seem to come up really quickly. So yeah, I would say probably that one. All right.
How did your accident change the way you view life?
How did the accident change the way that I viewed life? I think what it changed is that it gave, funny enough, it gave me a greater platform than I ever felt like I had before. I felt like I was in a really big pool before. It's interesting, I did an event a few years ago with, and we brought up this girl who has spinal muscular atrophy. And which really, when she was 2 years old, the doctors told her parents that by the time she was 6, she wouldn't get up off the ground. And she was doing this thing called hippotherapy, which is on a horse. It's sort of this Annie Oakley kind of thing on a horse. And the horse's gait really closely resembles a human gait. And so there's this almost osmosis kind of therapy that you engage some of these small muscles that are responsible for your posture and some of your movement, etc. So she walked up onto stage, and she said, I want to thank the organization that this event was for, but she also said, I want to thank SMA. Excuse me. Spinal muscular atrophy, because it's made me unique. And I think in a lot of ways, my accident kind of made me unique. And I think that's where it changed, is it gave me a bit more of a voice. And I think that was the greatest thing, and that was the greatest gift that really came out of it, was this sense of being unique. So, well, we're going to have to come back to you. We're going to try a couple of other people since you have a couple already. How about if we'll go 1, 2 area.
Have you heard of the Turtle Ridge Foundation?
What's that?
The Turtle Ridge Foundation?
Ever heard of the Turtle Ridge Foundation? Yes, I have. I actually did a bike ride in the beginning. I've been on the road since the 2nd of September, and we did a century bike ride in Vermont, and Cam and Jeff. So I rode with those guys. So I know those guys, and I know Bodie to a certain extent as well. So yeah.
Did your perception of skiing change before and after?
Did my perception of skiing change before and after? Skiing was my greatest teacher, because it's where I had my greatest success and my most crushing failures, and had to figure out how to move forward from each of those. But also after my accident, I felt like skiing owed me something. Potential is a great thing, it sort of keeps you warm at night, but if you never realize your potential, it's a pretty damning thing as well. And so afterwards, I felt like skiing owed me that view of myself, that view of saying, I'm going to figure out what my potential is. So yeah, I did look at it a little bit differently. How are we doing on time? We're doing one more? Okay, one more. Okay, you've had a couple. I've got to go to somebody after we go there. Do I try any other sports? Yes, so I do a variety of different sports. I've played golf. I've played golf out of my chair. I played golf. They have this cart that actually stands you up, which is pretty cool. And yeah, which was great. I finally had a little steeper angle into the ball, which was great. So I've done that. I've water skied. I've played basketball. I play basketball like a ski racer. We all think we're really good at basketball, and we're really not. Tennis, ping pong. A variety of different sports. Archery. you know, so like a bunch of different things. So I think that's it, but thank you all so much. Thanks, it's been great. Have a great day.